Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance and accounting pros prepare for change and transformation. Today, we're going to be talking about the impact of culture, mindset, and skills on digital transformation and kind of pose it up with, is it technology or people? And one of the best people I can think of to talk about that is Phillips. She's a researcher with Deloitte Consulting. She's focused her whole career on the interplay between technology and humanity. We met at the Association Digital Now conference in 2017, where she spoke about the human side of transformation and really got my attention. And then I immediately saw her writings in MIT Sloan and I think Harvard Business. She's well written in all those, but her first book was The Technology Fallacy: How People Are the Real Key to Digital Transformation, which I refer to that over and over again. She's been cited by the Wall Street Journal, as I said, MIT, Forbes, Fortune, CIO Magazine, quite accomplished. And say hello to our audience.
Hi, everyone. Tom, thank you so much for having me join you today.
It's awesome to be reconnected after these years. I mean, I've been a fan of yours, constantly watching your writings and speaking. So it's been a while, and I'm glad to see you. So let's get right into it. You've been looking into and talking about digital disruption long before COVID hit. But how have you seen businesses, survive digital disruptions, and especially what's happened as we've come through COVID?
That's interesting. So the technology fallacy, the book that you referenced, right, is really about the study of digital disruption. And when we look at that and compare what's happened over the past year, what we can see is that there's a difference between what we're calling chronic disruption that happens slowly over time. Sometimes you don't even know that it's happening to you, right? And then what we were all faced with starting 15 months ago, right? With what we're calling acute disruption. So it's very sudden, it's very severe. You can't ignore it, and you have to take action immediately, right? So we're seeing kind of a difference between that and what we've experienced 2020 and now, is what we're calling acute disruption. So it forces companies to make a move. Which is the biggest difference that we've seen. And as we've been studying digital transformation and digital disruption, it's easy, I think, to ignore the fact that technologies are potentially changing the landscape of the marketplace, right? It's so easy to ignore it until something happens in your industry, until something happens to your company. And so you can sit there and not do anything. And that's what a lot of companies, have done. They feel like digital transformation is important, but they're not prioritizing it at the level that they really should. They're not making enough progress on it. So that's what we've seen prior to 2020. 2020 happens, and I think you've seen all the memes out there that talk about, who is driving digital transformation in your organization? Is it the, CEO? Is it the CIO? Is it COVID? And, for most companies, it was COVID. And we've heard from so many executives about how digital transformation, they've seen like 10 years of digital transformation happen in 2 years, right? So they've really accelerated a lot of their efforts because they were forced to. They were forced to digitize a lot of their interactions with customers and change the way that they work on a daily basis as well.
And then, so now that's flowing through to the finance teams, which is our core audience here, right? So CFOs, controllers, even in public accounting, we're seeing that from a firm standpoint. So what we're finding is that's where people are struggling with getting their teams to adapt fast enough. And back to your point that I think you make quite often is it is the technology fallacy. We all think, and I'm guilty of this in the early days too, I was always thinking it's about putting the right technologies in and everyone will figure it out. But that's not what's really happening. And it's starting to hit what we're calling a mindset notion. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that? And maybe are there any tips or things that we can do to help accelerate the right mindsets in our organizations?
Yeah, so you bring up that point about what is the technology fallacy, right? And it is this concept that, you make the assumption that just because technologies are disrupting the markets, the marketplace, competition, things like that, then automatically the answer is to put in all this technology. And what we find over and over again is that's not the case. Technology is absolutely a big part of it. So you need key technology in order to be competitive. But really the hardest change that we're hearing from a lot of executives is it's people change, it's organizational change, it's cultural change. How do I get people to think differently? And that goes to your question around mindset. I think that the pandemic has forced a lot of companies and a lot of employees, a lot of organizations and people in those organizations to think differently. But so people have shifted some of their mindset, but there's a lot more room for that to grow, right? Because some people are of the belief that, look, this will pass, right? And then we can go back to things as normal. And the reality is that things won't ever go back to pre-pandemic.
Right.
And more than that, it's a wasted opportunity, right? So now that you've actually seen what your company can do when it thinks quickly, when it works more nimbly, when it's more collaborative, when you push some of the decision making down into the organization, when you move more quickly, all of these things, it wasn't the technology that was the technology was there to support the shift to remote work, to support all this shift and transformation during the pandemic. And it was the people and the organizations that had to get there from a mindset perspective. People are resistant to change, and in a situation like this, they're forced to change. So how do we take this lesson learned from 2020 and figure out how to be an organization that continues to evolve and continues to move with the times and continue to change going forward?
So what I'm hearing is that it's not going to stop. I mean, the other thing is everyone looks at a major change and they're like, right, okay, once we get through this, we can sit down and chill a little bit. And what I'm hearing you say, which I think I happen to agree with, is the acceleration is continuing, right? These technologies are continuing to evolve exponentially, which is part.
That's exactly right.
So that means we're going to have a sustained change effort, right? That really won't see a clear end. It will be one thing, like waves, I guess, might be the better metaphor there.
Yeah, well, I would say, continual evolution. Some people like to say continual transformation. All of that, are terms that we can use and ways of looking at it that could make sense. But it's really about not just getting from point A to point B, but it's about how do you continue on this journey to continue to look into the future and to prepare for that future. And it's challenging, but if you think about the ways technologies are evolving right now, artificial intelligence is continuing to evolve. Yes. And, people are afraid that robots are going to take over jobs. And to a certain degree, technology is moving in a direction where it's going to help us, it's going to replace some of the things that are just rote and repetitive kind of work, dangerous work, right? So we can use technologies in that way. And then we as humans can figure out how to tap into our human potential and to be more creative and to bring more strategic direction and to bring more value to our organizations in the unique way that humans can, as opposed to technology. So if we understand that technology will continue to evolve, then how do we, as an organization and as individuals, prepare for that?
Yeah, and what can we do to stay ahead of it? Which I love your notion that, right, the humans do the things that are really good and uniquely human. And in our profession, that comes with trust and obviously working with, the kind of relationship piece of it, collaboration. And so that gets to the idea of upskilling. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that, because I know you've been on the forefront of a lot of this stuff.
So upskilling, I think it's interesting because what we're seeing is kind of this convergence into what we're calling hybrid roles or hybrid skills. So people who are traditionally in technical roles, and that could be technical around technology or that could be technical around finance, right? they are absolutely going to have to continue to develop their expertise and depth in those areas, in those technical areas. But on top of that, it's critical that they also develop what we call these soft skills. So really it's this combination of hard skills and soft skills that come together, right? So how do they figure out how to collaborate? How do they figure out how to communicate? So even if you take a look at a data scientist, they're sitting there analyzing the data. If they don't understand the business, they're not going to know what insights to look for. And if they can't communicate that to the people who need the insights, then the value, the full value of those insights aren't going to be realized.
Yep.
And then you take the other side, right? So someone who's in a traditionally more soft-skilled kind of role, maybe it's around marketing, right? And understanding customers, customer service, things like that. They are absolutely going to have to dig deep and continue to deepen their expertise around understanding humans and around understanding customers and around empathy and around emotional connection. But they're also going to have to develop the hard skills. They're going to have to be technologically savvy. They're going to have to, understand technology to the point where they understand the trends that are happening within their functions. So as a marketer, how do I keep abreast of all the latest marketing technologies and the evolution of marketing platforms? And how do I understand how that's impacting my customer base, right? And how to reach my customers. So how do you understand technology within your function, but then also understand more broadly the bigger trends? So where is AI headed? Is it going to be able to help us predict more? Is it going to help make our jobs easier in some ways?
So you described, I would say, pun intended, to a T. We have a model we call the T-shaped professional, yes, which is exactly what you just described.
Right. And
broad boundary crossing skills on top of the deep technical accounting, tax, finance.
Absolutely.
Right? And then the digital part, you went into that, but just for the kind of benefit, everyone's talking about, we need tech savvy, we need digital skills, we need all these things. Tell us a little bit about how you see that. Like, what would you call that, and what would you advise people as they think about that?
Yeah, I would call that. You can call it tech savvy, you can call it tech fluency, really, but it's really about understanding technology. It's what it is not is saying that everyone's got to go out there and learn Python. That's not what it's saying. We're not saying that everyone needs to know how to do programming and do coding. And in fact, we'll see that a lot of technology is moving more towards easy user interface in terms of programming and things like that. But what it is about is understanding the latest technologies in your areas so that you keep abreast of them. So the latest technologies in finance, right? How is that going to change finance? How is artificial intelligence going to change the way we do finance and accounting and tax, right? How is that going to change all of that? So understanding those trends is absolutely important, because then it will give you a direction for where to chart your path in terms of developing skills. But also, when we get to the point where we can work together with computers, I think it really elevates the value that we can bring to our organizations, right? So kind of that what we call human and machine collaboration, right? So how does technology support the things that you do as a financial professional?
So it's funny, I did a session with Tom Peters, who's big on, he calls it extreme humanism, right? and I love what he said. He said, we have to move from AI, artificial intelligence, to intelligence augmented, and machine. I think you just described that one perfectly. So, all right, good. That's good. So the point is, they have to know they have to know the trends in their profession or industry, whatever, right? Both the business and the discipline, finance, marketing, et cetera. And then they have to understand enough about the technology to know what it is doing, but not necessarily how to make it do it. Like, they don't have to code it.
Correct.
Right? They have to know that RPA is being used in finance to automate a whole lot of stuff that we used to do manually. And they need to know that, and they need to know that that's on a trajectory that looks like that.
Right.
And they need to get, okay, got it. So that is.
Yeah, it's like this. So, we don't need to know how our smartphones work. We just need to know how to effectively use them to make ourselves more productive
Right.
and, better connect with people.
That is perfect. All right, tell us about your upcoming next two books, because I'm a fan of all the stuff you write. So tell me what you're working on.
So I've got two books coming up, and only in a pandemic year could this have happened. Not traveling, being stuck at home all the time. I did manage to squeeze in two books. So one is coming out at the end of June. It's called Work Better Together, and it's co-authored with Deloitte's Chief Wellbeing Officer. And it really is about how do you create trusted teams. It's about the importance of having meaningful relationships at work to enable that sense of trust, to move better, to enable creativity, and to empower individual and collective well-being. So that's really what that one is about. I'm super excited about it. If you think about it, and if you think about what technology is going to do and the role that humans will play later on, and what we discussed earlier, Tom, is this idea that, how do we focus on what makes us human, and how do we bring those values to work? Yep. It's even more important that we think about what elevates human performance. Yeah. And it really is paying attention to our well-being. And it's about creating meaningful connections with people, because we as human beings are social creatures. Even the most introverted person on earth is still, to a certain degree, a social creature. Yeah. The second book that we've got coming out, I've co-authored with my original author group on the technology fallacy. And we've come together to actually do a sequel. This sequel is really about this acute disruption that we're seeing in 2020. And how does that differ from what's in the technology fallacy, right? So the technology fallacy was about the chronic disruption over time. And this is about how do you prepare your organization to meet sudden changes? How do you prepare your organization to think into the future and to maybe do scenario planning and project into the future? And then how do you move quickly when something like this happens? So that's what that one's about, and it's called the transformation myth, because there's a myth that transformation happens, like a caterpillar turns into a butterfly and then it stops. And what we're really talking about is, this is about continuous transformation.
Doesn't stop.
Just as we talked about earlier, it does not stop.
Wow, it's very timely, because everybody's, I think, starting to think about this, especially even in the finance side. I mean, I know the corporate CEO level has been thinking about this, but now it's hitting finance in a pretty big way. So very timely. And thank you for coming on the show and talking through all this with us, An. So let me give, so you can follow her on Twitter at An Phillips, AnPhillips. You can Google her and find out all her stuff. You'll see her in all those magazines. But I would say look for the books. I still think the technology fallacy is a great one, so I'm going to plug that one. Work Better Together and the Transformation Myth. And once we get done, we're going to end up with a blog post, and we'll put links to all those on by the time that we begin to publish. So this is awesome. For all of you out there, come back, visit us on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of each month at noon Eastern. It's #FutureReadyLive, and we'll see you then. An, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thanks so much, Tom.